What is up, Flow Meets? Today I want to talk a little bit about something that's been coming up in conversations a bit lately here in the community and outside of our community, in the broader rope flow community, and it's the topic of balance, right? Because without balance, you have no flow. You really have to be able to balance. Otherwise, even if you're stationary, you're not going to be able to flow when you don't have your balance. And it's particularly so when you start to be moving about, right? Whether you're turning ipsilateral or whether you're doing contralateral movements, you need to be able to maintain balance, okay, while you're doing that. And we go through a lot of that in the Essentials program, and especially Art of Flow and Panther Flow programs, all these things. But for those of you who are not in those programs, it's still important, whether you're a beginner or whether you're more advanced. And so I wanted to touch on that at a high level, which is mainly you want to maintain a good amount of space between your feet, hip width or so apart, maybe slightly wider when you're in a square stance here like this, and even so when you're in a split stance, having that same similar hip width apart and maintaining that with your turns, right? So when you finish a turn, you still have that space between your feet to give you that balance. So you're not going to be like on a balancing beam or high wire act, right? Because then you are less able to effectively balance, especially when you start moving this rope and your hands around and your weight is shifting on the top part of your body. But one thing we don't talk about much or enough in those programs is something that I want to talk about today, because it is appropriate for this month's challenge, which is our transverse, right? Our toe-to-toe and our heel-to-heel rope paths, right? As opposed to our overhand or our underhand path, right? Which is where we often find ourselves balancing. When you get into this transverse plane and you're doing things like dragon rolls or dragon heads or whatever else that you're doing in this transverse toe-to-toe or heel-to-heel plane, we tend to be, naturally, mostly hip width, maybe a little more apart. Not many of us are flowing like this, but some I have seen do it. So that's good. But there's also turns from this plane. So you want to make sure that when you're making turns, you're maintaining that similar space between your feet, and so you can still have your balance when you finish your turn. Because what's going to happen, whether you're transverse or not, as you start controlling the rope, right, with your core and your arms and your hands, your weight is often shifting, right, from side to side, from front to back if you're in a split stance. And that shifting of weight will wreak havoc on your balance if your feet are not positioned in an advantageous space where they have a solid base for balance, right? Another thing I want to talk about with this transverse plane that I think is a lot of fun to play with, and maybe you have or have not, but that is to say, let's get out of this hip width or shoulder width stance and get into somewhat wider than shoulder width stance, and then start looking to see how does that impact our flows, right? And you can even go wider if you want. One thing I like to do, and we talk about this in the Panther Flow program a lot, is this Elvis Presley, right? This move where the knee doesn't just go in like this, the heel comes up so the hip can turn as we're going from side to side, so we can maintain better balance and better core control of the rope as our arms moving about. That's one thing I like to focus on and try to train for myself, and you can try it as well. So when you get these wider stances, with or without that, it's still fun to start seeing what happens in this wider stance. How does it feel different? If you start focusing on controlling that rope with your core, and it's a simple figure of 8, and then this propeller here, and the figure of 8 on this side, even as a beginner, these are moves that you can do, and you'll feel quite a bit different than when you're doing it this way. So I would recommend spending some time with a wider stance, because you're going to start firing up those glutes and those quads and those hamstrings and those, all your whole lower half, and also your core. You're going to get more involved because you've got to maintain that balance while you're controlling that rope. So you're going to have that low and high shoulder dipping on this side, coming around here with the propeller, and the opposite low and high shoulder on this side. So practice that, play around with that, see how it feels. And I'd love to hear your feedback when you spend some time with it. It is something that I really enjoy more and more and more. And this whole transverse side has so much, like I said, there's so much meat on this bone that, even I'm still exploring a lot of things, whether it's single-handed or not. Well, I'll be sharing some more with you soon.